I'm Brad Stone in San Francisco, in for Emily Chang. This is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, who had the best holiday? Apparently Amazon. The company is reporting a record-breaking season. Plus, more than 100 billion apps were downloaded in 2018. We'll discuss what's fueling growth in the mobile market. And we look back at one of the biggest stories of the year, the role social media and tech played in influencing elections around the globe. But first to our top story. Amazon says this holiday season has been record-breaking. More items have been ordered worldwide than ever before, and tens of millions of people signed up for Amazon Prime memberships. The company says sales of Amazon devices are up significantly this holiday season compared to last year. Paul Sweeney, Director of North American Research at Bloomberg Intelligence, joins us now. Paul, thanks for joining us after the holiday. You know, these Amazon releases can almost be parodied these days for their lack of specifics. Tens of millions of new Prime customers, more Amazon devices than last year. What do you read from this?
Yeah, you're right. Not a lot of specifics coming out of the company, but clearly we're seeing, strong retail sales during this holiday period. Visa, MasterCard are talking about, growth of about 5% across the board, and e-commerce, up close to 20% for the holiday season. So we know that the underlying demand, the underlying consumer demand is very strong, and that being the case, clearly one of the biggest beneficiaries will be Amazon, given their market share.
Okay, but you make the point that it's not just Amazon's party, that e-commerce sales and retail sales are up across the board. Who else, Paul, do you see as a winner here this holiday season, or is it too soon to tell?
Well, again, I think, what we're seeing across the board in retail looks pretty strong. Walmart is probably going to be a beneficiary. They're very strong online as well. On the e-commerce side, any of the brands that have really invested in their e-commerce platforms as the consumer migrates from bricks and mortar to e-commerce, the brands that have invested in their e-commerce sites clearly are going to benefit not only this season, but going forward likely.
Paul, 3 months ago, Amazon gave a conservative estimate for the fourth quarter, and the stock has been punished since, down almost 30% from the high in September. How do you reconcile that conservative estimate and the downward trend in the stock with, this week what appears to be good news?
Yeah, I think, clearly when the company reported their last quarter's earnings, the guidance clearly disappointed investors. We had kind of two dynamics going on. One was slowing revenue growth, slower than the street had been anticipating. At the same time, the company is still committed to investing in their business, with their expenses, operating expenses and capital expenses both growing substantially. So you really had the concern of a growing margin pressure for Amazon. So, I think the bulls were clearly saying, listen, this is just Amazon kind of, giving us conservative guidance, and they'll come in and beat strong, assuming we have a good holiday period, and that appears to be what we're having here.
Paul, quick final question. One of these vague numbers jumped out at me. Amazon said consumers bought 3 times the amount using their voice on Alexa and Echo speakers than last year. What do you read from that? How real is voice shopping, do you think?
I think it's getting much more real, and I think we're seeing big investments in voice-activated hardware, not just from Amazon, but also from Google and from Apple. So I think you're going to see, the types of tasks that these voice-activated services can do to continue to grow. And clearly, as it relates to shopping, anytime Jeff Bezos and the Amazon folks can take friction out of the shopping experience, that is good for their business.
Okay, Paul Sweeney with Bloomberg Intelligence, thank you. In a note out on Wednesday, Wedbush securities analyst Dan Ives said that demand for Tesla's Model 3 looks very strong going into next year. Ives added that underlying drivers for the EV market are likely to push consumers toward the Model 3, especially at a time when many automakers are betting big on SUVs. And now Dan Ives with Wedbush Securities joins us now via Skype. Dan, thanks for joining. Wall Street is divided on Tesla. I think there's something like 24 bearish calls on the stock. You're obviously bullish. What do the bears have wrong about Tesla right now?
Look, I think the bears still think a capital raise is on the horizon. They think profitability is not sustainable. And I think, look, the biggest thing, they're underestimating core demand, especially on Model 3 going 2019. Especially, when you look at Europe and China coming on, we think many of the bears, and I'd say a lot of the skeptics, have underestimated unit demand by upwards of 15–20%. I think that's kind of the prove me. 3Q is the first step forward. I think this quarter is going to be another feather in the cap for Musk and really solidify that bull thesis, although it's going to continue to be a controversial bull-bear knife fight.
Dan, everything we have heard from Elon over the past few weeks, suggests to me that he and the company burned the candle on both ends to make their third quarter. That the gas tank is empty. They went all out. So what makes you so confident that the kinks in manufacturing have been worked out sustainably for the long term?
Yeah, look, for the long term, that's still a variable that they need to prove. But right now, call it 6K per week. That's the key, right? In terms of just what production looks like coming out of Fremont and Giga. Production now, it really becomes more of a demand story. And that's really the focus right now for the bulls, especially with Europe coming on the first quarter. And I think you've seen the stock rebound significantly just given what you've seen on profitability and the demand factor on Model 3 and the mid-range, right? The mid-range is going to be key, and even the base model coming on. But nonetheless, this is a prove me stock, and every quarter you're going to see more and more controversy till they could show sustainable production with no bottlenecks. We have not seen any so far this quarter.
Yeah, controversy does appear to be a constant in the Tesla story. But let's talk about demand. My understanding is that a federal tax credit gets cut in half at the beginning of next year towards buying electric vehicles. So how do you see that playing out, and what will the impact be on demand for Teslas and the Model 3?
Yeah, and we've talked about it. It's a bit of a pull forward, especially in states like California in Q4. I think you go into 1Q, you'll see some of those units that pulled forward, and the streets modeled that pretty much correctly. But as that sort of comes off in terms of that pull forward, Europe comes on, especially with production starting in January, going through the first quarter. So I think right now there's a pull forward that gets halved going the first half. But then the mid-range comes on, much lower price points. That's really the core part of demand. And look, and that's the key part of the Tesla bull thesis, that as you start to have the 46K and eventually the 35K, that really goes more into the norm, into the masses, where you'll see volume spike, as well as Europe and China coming on board.
Dan, we're seeing more economists predict a recession for 2019. How vulnerable is Tesla in that scenario?
Look, they're vulnerable like any auto manufacturer, especially on the high end. So when you look at recession, especially on the high end, that's the one where you definitely would, I think demand would come down pretty significantly. But nonetheless, if you look at Tesla, you look at some of what's happening in China in terms of some of the subsidies, as well as some of the price cuts that have happened there. You look what's happened in the U.S., at least so far, visibility through the first half feels strong. And I think, look, that's really going to be the key here, is that you look at recession, you look at some of the economic indicators. At least thus far, we have not seen any softness, at least in the channel. But I think that's going to be right now, as we get into 2019, really a big debate for Tesla, as they need to prove themselves every quarter, just like we saw last quarter, which I think shocked the bears that continue to think that this is not the disruptive technology that we believe it is.
It certainly did. Dan, last question for you. Tesla Twitter is a reliable form of entertainment, and one of the enduring features, particularly these days, is customers who seem to be complaining about service issues directly to Elon. I understand that is anecdotal, but does that concern you at all?
Look, fundamentally, as you have more customers come on board, even internationally, you're going to have more inherent customer service issues, as well as it's something that Tesla is going to need to expand. And I think also it's Musk taking himself out personally or some of the day-to-day, because even look over the weekend, he responds to a customer about that, the EV tax, about that, what happens if a car that they order did not ship by December 31st, and he's like, well, Tesla will cover that. And ultimately, that was a big overhang. You know, we heard from a bunch of investors on that. So it just speaks to just worries the more that they respond there. I think Tesla, look, they have to grow up, and I think this is part of that sort of maturity process as they kind of go through this.
Well, maturity is certainly something that investors will be looking for more of when it comes to Tesla. Dan Ives at Wedbush, thanks for joining us. Coming up, the use of voice assistants has grown tremendously in the last year, but who's really leading innovation in this space? And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on Sirius XM. This is Bloomberg. The use of AI and voice assistant technology has exploded the last few years, both among consumers and businesses. So who's taken the lead in 2019? Here to weigh in, Igor Yablokov, founder of the voice recognition company Yap, which was bought by Amazon about a decade ago, and now the CEO of Prion. Igor, thank you for joining us. I want to start with some ancient history. More than a decade ago, you started Yap. You sold it to Amazon. It became one of the seeds of the very successful Alexa voice assistant. And now, our homes are littered with these devices. I just want to ask you, back then, did you ever imagine that this would take off as quickly as it has?
Well, I don't know if it took off as quickly as I hoped. Obviously, many of us in the field have been toiling away for decades in some cases. But it's such a powerful way of interaction. It's the first way that we learn to communicate with each other as humans. The power of the voice is really something that is a demarcation line in terms of when a baby first starts interacting with the world as well, and essentially becoming a more active participant in this. In that environment, and so that's what was really, really exciting to many of our colleagues that were working together to make this happen.
And I know, Igor, that you are focused now on bringing this technology into the workplace, and we'll get to Prion in a moment. But just looking out at at Amazon, it's got about 60% of the market in the U.S., but Google Home is right there and growing quickly. It was 30%. Apple just entered the market. How set do you think this competitive dynamic is? Does Amazon have an enduring lead, or do you expect to see new entrants and startups and maybe a little bit of a reversal among the major players in the coming years?
Well, at Yap, we had a big breakthrough, and that's one of the reasons why the acquisition in 2011 was so secretive. They didn't want Apple and Google knowing that they basically had a drop on them, and we're bringing it to market in a new and novel platform that caught everybody by surprise. Now, if you look at Apple, Facebook, Google, and Amazon, their instantiations of these products essentially are reinforcing their core businesses. So if they're making money through devices, that's how they're doing it. In the case of Apple, with Google and Facebook, they're going to reinforce advertisement revenue, and with Amazon, certainly they want to reduce the friction between you and any of the commerce that they're projecting forward. So they're all looking at it as
Are you a believer in voice shopping? That's real?
I think it is real. I mean, if you look at some of the normal things that most households require, I think it can probably do 80% of the things that we need that are repetitive, and I know that Amazon is banking on that.
Okay, let's talk about Prion now and augmented intelligence. What is it, and can these sorts of services have the same impact in the office that they're having in our homes right now?
Well, I think if you look at some of the technologies that we use at home and try to imagine what they would look like in the workplace, lightweight messaging may be Twitter-like engagement that we have, but it's an entity like Slack that unlocks it in the workplace. We may use Facebook at home, but it's an entity like LinkedIn that we interact with in the workplace as well. And we see the same delineation is going to happen between the types of AIs we use at home and the type we use at work. Augmented intelligence is as follows. One of the core precepts that Uber was founded on was the concept of what would happen to productivity if we gave everybody a chauffeur. And you didn't have to tend to a car, pay the insurance, worry about keeping it in repair. And it's the same thing for us. Where we talk about augmented intelligence is, imagine that you can give every worker in an enterprise the equivalent of an executive assistant that was a Nobel laureate. What would that actually do for their productivity, where we actually end up wasting almost a third of our daily lives just trying to access and interact with different systems around us for processes, decision support, and knowledge access? And how does augmented intelligence help reduce the frictionality between you and those resources? That's what we're betting the whole company on.
Igor, that does sound like a compelling vision, but it is one that you share with some pretty big companies. You know, Amazon, which you sold Yap to, IBM. I know you recently hired your chief scientist from IBM's Watson project. So why is a startup set to succeed here against these Goliaths?
I think in some cases, they have a vast portfolio that they need to tend to, whereas we're betting the whole company on this future, and we're specifically focused on essentially solving some of the accuracy and security considerations that are necessary for the adoption of this form of artificial intelligence in the enterprise. In many cases, one of the traditional questions that any venture capitalist would ask you, and they asked the same questions last time, is, isn't some entity going to come in and essentially overturn the market that a startup is operating in? And at the end of the day, they view us as outsourced R&D in some ways, where we do some of the critical work in terms of proving that a market exists, and then they seek partnerships with us later on. And that's the future that we're looking forward to.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Igor Yablokov, CEO of Prion, thanks for joining us from Raleigh. Coming up, a new report says the average mobile user spends 3 hours a day on apps. We'll discuss who's winning the battle for the screen time next. This is Bloomberg. Over the last year, the use of apps among mobile users has grown even larger, with a few key winners in the space. Here to discuss the biggest mobile trends in 2018 and what to expect for next year, we're joined by Danielle Levitas, EVP of Market Insights at App Annie, a global provider of mobile data. Danielle, thanks for joining us. You know, lots of good numbers in your recent report. Global app downloads up 10% over last year. You know, how do you characterize the strength of the mobile app ecosystem in 2018?
Thanks for having me, Brad. At App Annie, given that we're able to serve the world's biggest brands by delivering the data and analytics that they need, we have a unique view on what's happening across the globe. When you look at downloads, for example, we're talking just first-time installs. And with the growth of 10% at a market that's 10 years in, it's an indicative of just the sheer breadth that mobile serves. It's social, it's games, it's music and entertainment, it's retail, it's banking, it's travel. So the market's incredibly healthy, whether you look at it from downloads, time spent, as well as monetization, which we can talk more about.
Yeah, time spent. I'm looking here. Users spend nearly 3 hours each day in apps. You know, impressive. Again, up 10% over last year. But Danielle, a little worrisome too that we're staring into our phones for that long.
It is frightening. It continues to go up, and at some point there's got to be an upper limit. But the reality is it is 3 hours a day in the U.S. In mobile-first markets that really were born digitally in mobile, we're looking at closer to 4 hours per day. I think it's really important to just take into account the sheer ways that mobile serves us. We use it to communicate and socialize, right? That's half our time. That still leaves in a market like the US 90 minutes a day, if not more, that's spent in shopping that we've been talking about, right? That's spent in fintech and banking, that's giving us access to information, that's allowing us to plan our travel and getting around town. It's allowing us to learn and to share information, to be entertained. It really does serve virtually every corner of our life. And you could argue, is it too much? You could also argue it gives us sort of this democratized access to technology, tools, and information that we didn't have before mobile and apps.
Danielle, we're ending the year here with this sense that Facebook is in trouble, and yet in your report here, 4 of the top 5 apps downloaded were Facebook's, Facebook itself, Messenger, WhatsApp, and Instagram. You know, what do you take from that?
I think habits are hard to break. I think at the end of the day, it's really about the fact that convenience trumps everything. And when you have the network effect, when you have the convenience of being able to reach, you know, your primary circle, your extended circle, and in some cases, even from a business standpoint, that is incredibly sticky when you have billions of people that are reliant upon these technologies. I mean, WhatsApp is the dominant messaging platform. But the fact of the matter is there is room for new opportunities and new challengers, if you will. I mean, look at TikTok, right, which is more about these short form videos that are ultimately embedded in other social platforms. As a good example of something, there is this hunger, especially when you look to, for example, Gen Z and how they're using apps in high frequency, more sessions per day. So Facebook is quite dominant, but we are spending another 90+ minutes a day on a whole host of other apps.
You just mentioned TikTok. I was going to bring it up. It's owned by a Chinese company called ByteDance. Are we seeing more mobile app trends emerge out of Asia right now?
I don't think you can talk about mobile and not talk about China. If you look at monetization, it's really the Chinese and the American publishers that dominate as the 2 biggest markets. China has more mobile users than any country in the world, which isn't surprising given its population. And when you look at tier 1, tier 2 cities in China, they're incredibly mobile first. They're making, you know, enormous number of purchases through their apps. They're in many ways sort of ahead of any other markets. But I'll also say that Chinese publishers, for the most part, are really growing in their home market. International expansion's been really limited within Asia for the most part, TikTok being an exception. But I think that's going to be a key trend to watch over the next, 12 to 24 months is how do those companies expand outside of Asia? And similarly, how do big publishers, whether it's in Japan, Korea, UK, US, continue to expand internationally?
Okay, Danielle Levitas with App Annie, thank you very much.
Thank you, Brad.
Coming up, from privacy issues to Russian meddling, 2018 has been a bad year for Facebook, but one of tech's biggest influencer remains optimistic. We'll hear what Yuri Milner has to say about the social network. Plus, San Francisco is taking on homelessness with the help of the tech industry. One Silicon Valley titan tells us what he's doing to help. This is Bloomberg. Bloomberg Technology. I'm Brad Stone in San Francisco. 2018 has been a tough year for Facebook, but Russia's most influential tech investor isn't overly concerned. DST Global founder Yuri Milner was an early investor in Facebook and Twitter before going on to back Spotify, Airbnb, and Alibaba. Emily Chang sat down with Milner at the 2018 Breakthrough Prize Awards and asked him just how optimistic he was about Facebook's future.
First of all, I don't agree that it's an existential crisis. I think it's a little bump on the road. I think that Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram are amazing products with more than 1 billion people each. So you can't really dismiss it as an existential crisis. But I think that Facebook always was and is an evolving system, and they've always been responding to challenges, and the challenges that they are facing can be solved through a combination of human attention and artificial intelligence elements. So, there are always bad actors who are testing different products. But I feel confident that this will be taken care of through technology. You know, it's a technology company.
Does it concern you that, you know, the privacy, the hacking, the potential election meddling, the fact that the founders of all the companies that you mentioned that Facebook bought have gone? One of them even tried to start a delete Facebook movement.
Well, everything should be put in perspective. If you look at other companies that did acquisitions, the founders of these companies stayed for an amazingly long time. I mean, it should be compared to other acquisitions. You know, it's very often happens that founders are gone in 12 months or in 6 months. You know, here I think they've stayed long enough to ensure continuity and transition, and I think those products will do very well going forward.
SoftBank has a lot of money in the tech ecosystem, and the Saudis and the Saudi government have a lot of money in SoftBank. There's a lot of controversy around it given the murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Do you think it's a problem that SoftBank has so much money in the tech ecosystem?
Well, I think we should be judging people based on the laws and the global situations that were at the time when they were making those investments and making those decisions. So going forward, things may be different. So I think you know, people are learning as they go, and we have the last time we have been taking money from Russian investors was in 2011. So,
and that way you made a choice.
Many things have changed since then, and our investor base is very global since that time.
Just one more question. You've invested in, you know, Facebook and Alibaba and Flipkart. What do you think is the next big thing in technology, and where is the next big thing in terms of the hot region for tech investment?
Well, if you look at the previous 10 years, if you add US and China, that would be 90% of all value that was created in internet. Europe is around 3%, the rest of the world around 7%. So logically speaking, you would think that Europe should be doing much better in the future, sort of catching up with US and China. I think China can increase their share as, you know, Chinese companies go global. I think it's not inconceivable to see more value accruing to Chinese companies. I think
more than there
US
is in the United
States? Well, that remains to be seen, but I think the amazing success that the US companies have enjoyed in the last 15, 20 years was really based on the fact that those are global companies.
And what about technology? What's beyond smartphones and social networks and AI? Or is it AI?
Well, it is AI, yes. I would agree with you. And AI really cutting across pretty much horizontally across all technologies, and you know, each significant company will become an AI company.
That was DST Global founder Yuri Milner. Meanwhile, San Francisco passed its controversial homeless tax, ending a public battle between some of tech's biggest names. Voters decided to boost funding for homeless services through a tax on corporations with gross receipts more than $50 million. Salesforce co-CEO Mark Benioff donated millions in support of the law. Emily Chang sat down with Benioff just days before the vote.
We have a very serious homeless crisis in San Francisco, and it is getting much, much worse. We have 7,500 homeless individuals currently on the streets. We have 1,200 homeless families, each with 2 kids. And how are we going to get them off the streets? It's getting worse. It's a problem. We know it. That's why I'm voting for Prop C.
What about the unfairness that other companies are citing here? You have Jack Dorsey saying, I admit that while I come at this as a citizen first, there's an unfairness I see in my role as CEO of Square. This doesn't apply to Twitter. Companies like Square and Stripe would be taxed at a significantly larger total contribution than much larger companies like Salesforce. Do you see the unfairness?
Well, what I see is a crisis of inequality in San Francisco. I mean, that is what is striking to me. We have 70 billionaires here in our city. That's incredible. We have companies that you report on with hundreds of billions of dollars of market cap. Of course, you know, Salesforce, we're the largest employer here in San Francisco, not just largest tech employer, largest employer. We have a $100 billion market cap. And you just talked about a few companies. Square worth 30 billion, Twitter worth 20 billion, Stripe, you know, 20 billion. Well, the amazing thing is these companies can afford it. For us, it's just a $10 million tax. These are immaterial amounts to us. $10 million doesn't mean anything. You know, that's less than the private plane that Jack Dorsey is going to fly around on. You know that. And I'll tell you right now, it's the money that we need to make a difference here in San Francisco.
You've taken a hard line on some other companies like Facebook, and in the past you've said that's caused you some troubles in your own friendships. And I wonder, has this done the same?
Well, of course, you know.
How are your relationships being affected by this?
Emily, well, hopefully our relationship is all right. But I mean, number one is, the most important thing is that I feel like I need to speak my truth, and sometimes that means speak truth to power. I've had a lot of tough phone calls from executives who get very unhappy when I say something like, you know, I said in January, Facebook is the new cigarettes. It's not good for you. It's addictive. It's being manipulated. Others are trying to get you to use it in ways you don't even understand. All of that has turned out to be true, and much worse than even I ever imagined. And that's a tough conversation. And then this is a tough conversation too, where I said, business is the greatest platform for change. We can fix the homeless situation in San Francisco right now. All we have to do is vote for Proposition C, and it's immaterial to our business right now, the financial numbers, but homelessness is material to my business. And that's a tough conversation for people don't want to give.
Tim Cook has also taken on Facebook and Google over their business model, over how they handle user data and privacy. Mark Zuckerberg hit back at that on the earnings call. Who's going to be on the right side of history in this privacy debate? And what do you make of this sort of bigger tech smackdown?
Tim Cook for sure is on the right side of history. He and I both have called for a national privacy law here in the United States. You know, we have GDPR in Europe. That's doing a fantastic job in Europe in protecting European citizens. They have more protection and control than any other region in the world. We need that here in the United States. A lot of the privacy debates that we're having right in our city in San Francisco, well, we wouldn't be having that if we were in Paris or London or Munich. We need a national privacy law in the United States. We need that now. We need some of our great senators and some of our great congresspeople, and they know who they are, to really say, okay, we're going to write this law and get this done. We're trying to advocate for that. We've been doing that for months. That's going to help us to get through it, because right now our data is being misused in ways that we don't even understand, and all of that needs to come into the light. Look, companies need to really start to address their core values. What is the most important thing to Facebook? What is the most important thing to Salesforce? For us, we know it's trust. Nothing is more important than the trust we have with our key stakeholders. That includes our customers, our employees, our partners, and also our homeless. You know, the homeless are a key stakeholder of our business. What matters in San Francisco matters to me, and it matters to our employees. And you know what? Even when they're on their way home from work and they're in their BART station here, you know, it's becoming more difficult. That's why I'm voting for Proposition C.
Some would say that maybe it's a little bit hypocritical of you to be talking about privacy when this is something that a lot of companies do. Where do you draw the line?
Well, we draw the line right there, where we say the most important thing to us in our company is trust. Nothing is more important than the trust that we have with our employees, our customers, our partners, even our city, our community. And can I look at you straight in the eye and say, we're doing everything we can to have the most trusted relationships? And if there are things that come up with Salesforce, and there have been, and there will be in the future, and there have been in the past, then we have to address those things. But we're going to try to be a best practice, and we're always going to try to be on the right side of history.
That was Bloomberg's Emily Chang with Salesforce co-CEO Mark Benioff. Coming up, we'll hear from the man behind President Trump's digital strategy in the 2016 election and look ahead to his plans for 2020. This is Bloomberg. Brad Parscale helped President Trump run perhaps the most successful social media operation in presidential campaign history. Since then, Parscale has been elevated to run his entire re-election campaign for 2020. Emily Chang sat down with Parscale earlier this year to discuss the groundwork he's laying for the next election.
No, it does not. I mean, look, I think this is a successful president who's trying to make the world safer. Look, I can't speak about what the president is. I'm not in the White House, and I'm not privy to all that information. But I think what the president's doing is, as he continues to make this world safer, it'll be great for 2020.
But you have leaders in your own party saying this is treasonous, this is disgraceful.
No, we have rhinos within the party who say that. I believe that you'll see, and you'll long-term see, just like the president has done time after time after time, showing that he's right and he's making the world safer and making this economy better, and I believe in him.
The president is taking Vladimir Putin at his word that Russia did not meddle in the U.S. election. He seems to believe the president of Russia over the U.S. intelligence community.
You would have to ask him what he believes or he doesn't believe.
What do you believe?
I'm not going to get into what I believe. That's not what's important for me. My job is to support the president, and you would have to go ask him on that one.
So, as you work towards re-election, you're already working on this. You're meeting with the president, what, a couple times a week?
Yeah, I meet with him, call him.
How do you handle the special investigation as you approach?
There's a legal team that sits and works on all that. You know, that's not my goal. I think right now, if you see it, that most of America, and I think the data shows that this doesn't resonate with Americans. Very few people are connected with it. It has had no effect on the polling numbers, and the support of Donald Trump and President Trump has nothing but increased since this investigation. I believe America sees it for this fake story on collusion, and I've continued to say there was zero collusion. It's such a joke, at least from my part in the campaign, and I think I played a major role. So I just know it's not part of it, and I'll continue to say that any foreign entity that does meddle in an election, should be held accountable. But that's what the government's there to do. It's not my role.
And yet, the Trump campaign's message seemed to align very much with what Russia was also trying to disseminate. For example, President Trump in July 2016 saying, Russia, if you're listening, I hope you can find the 30,000 emails that went missing, which is the very same day that the Russians, according to U.S. intelligence, tried to access or hack into Hillary's
You'd have to
servers.
ask him that one on timing. Sometimes things in life, I don't know.
Did you see any evidence when you were doing what you were doing?
No, I didn't see anything.
Anything that seems suspect?
No, look, I don't have complete access to everything that's happening in the country. That's why we do have intelligence. I have not access to any of that stuff. But I will tell you that from everything I saw, it looks like there was no collusion. There was nothing that we did with them. We ran a legitimate campaign, and it was the right thing. We did everything the right way, and we ran a completely legitimate campaign. And it's unfortunate that some people just didn't like what happened, and so they have to make these conspiracy theories up to explain what they don't like in life.
Are you worried that Americans can be manipulated online by foreign powers? Does that concern you?
No, I think Americans are smart enough. I've never really believed that you're going to be manipulated into these thoughts.
Do you think that voters will still trust social media ads if you use them again? I'm not one to speak on what voters can and will trust. It's a big question. I continue to think that using social media and using advertising for all businesses and all political campaigns will still be an important way to get people to show up to vote for Trump in 2020.
That was President Trump's 2020 campaign manager, Brad Parscale. Still ahead, Facebook has come under intense scrutiny following several data breaches this year. Looking back on our biggest interviews this year, we'll hear from COO Sheryl Sandberg. This is Bloomberg. Facebook has come under fire this year amid a series of scandals over data privacy. Emily Chang caught up with Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg in April, soon after the Cambridge Analytica controversy.
We know that we did not do a good enough job protecting people's data, and I'm really sorry for that, and Mark's really sorry for that. And now what we're doing is taking really strong action. Starting Monday, we're going to be starting the process of rolling out to people all over the world, right at the top of their newsfeed, all the apps they've connected to, and a very easy way to delete those apps. And as part of that, we're going to tell anyone who might have had their data affected or accessed by Cambridge Analytica, who they are. We're taking very strong steps to restrict more data that apps historically have had access to. And we're looking beyond apps. We announced yesterday that we're taking steps to shut down certain use cases in groups and pages and search and events. These are just the latest steps. This is going to be a long process. We are systematically looking at all the ways Facebook data is used. We're going to find more things. We're going to tell you about them. We're going to shut them down. And this is a forever process, because security is always an arms race. You build, someone tries to misuse. You build, they try to misuse a new way. And we're committed to this for the very long run.
Mark has personally taken responsibility. He said, we didn't take a broad enough view of what our responsibility is. That was a huge mistake. It was my mistake. How much do you feel personally responsible?
I feel deeply personally responsible, because there are real mistakes that we made and that I made. And I think when you take a step back and you think about what's happened here, for a long time, we were really focused on building social experiences. And a lot of good happened because of those. And when we found problems, we would shut down that problem. So the specific case of the Friends of Fen sharing that happened with Cambridge Analytica, that specific case was shut down in 2015. But what we didn't do until recently, and what we're doing now, is just take a broader view, looking to be more restrictive in ways data could be misused. We also didn't build our operations fast enough, and that's on me. We had 10,000 people working in security at the beginning of the year. At the end of this year alone, we will more than double to 20,000. We are massively investing in smart technology, and we're doing all of this to make sure that we get to a place where we can proactively protect people's data.
Facebook has constructed a business model that leverages personal data that users share with Facebook, and you are the chief architect of that. Assuming the business model will evolve as a result of all these changes, how will that impact the bottom line? How will that impact profitability?
We've never run this company for short-term gains, and we've never run this company to maximize profits. We run this company for the long-term health of our community and business. We announced 2 quarters ago in earnings that these investments are big and they will impact profitability. And that's okay with us, because it's the right thing to do. We want to make these investments. We'll update at the next quarter.
So, talk a little bit about, you mentioned that a few advertisers have paused their spending as a result of this. How big is that pause? Can you give us any color?
It's a few advertisers, but what matters is not how big it is. What matters is the questions they're asking. So advertisers are people. They're people who use Facebook. So are investors. And everyone wants to know the same thing, which is, are you protecting people's data? I think the advertisers and people who use Facebook also want to know that the good things will continue. And those are really important as well. Earlier this week, I was in Houston. I met this incredible man, Ramon. I went to his local taco store. When Hurricane Harvey happened, he had lots of food but no power. So he used Facebook to find a competitor who had a taco truck, teamed up with him, and then they used Facebook to drive around and find people who needed food. Now, those people were publicly sharing their location on Facebook. And what people want to know from us is, are we going to take steps to be more protective and more proactive? And the answer to that is a firm yes. But we're also going to take steps to make sure that the good that happens on Facebook can still happen.
With all that we know now, do you believe that Facebook played a decisive role in electing Donald Trump?
There's a lot of concern about what happened in this election. We are certainly concerned about the foreign interference on our platform. The overall picture here, I don't think anyone knows yet, but it's an important question, and I think it's one that's going to be studied for years and years to come. Where we're focused now is taking the lessons of past elections and making sure we apply them going forward. Foreign interference. You may have seen earlier this week, we took very strong steps to take Russian IRA content off our site. That was the content that was in the U.S. election that we did not find quickly enough, but now we're analyzing ahead, and we found 270 pages and accounts linked to them that were deceptive in Russian, targeted mostly at Russians. Our message is very clear. There is no place for this deceptive content, for these troll farms anywhere in the world. We took this down in Russia. We're looking for others from other similar groups, and we're going to take them down anywhere in the world.
Mark has been asked if he's the right person to lead Facebook. Do you believe that he is? He said he is. Do you agree?
I believe deeply in Mark. Mark had a vision for what social services and social sharing could be, and that vision remains really important. Mark also, along with me and all of us, take full responsibility for what's happening here. And we're making a very important shift. We're going to keep building social products because sharing is so important to people all over the world. And we're going to be much more proactive. Emily, I'm not going to sit here and say we won't find more problems. We will. We are going to continue to find problems. We are going to continue to shut down situations when we find them. And this is a forever thing because security is an arms race. This is something that we're signed up for, not just now, but on an ongoing basis.
Mark Zuckerberg said he hasn't seen any meaningful impact in use, but we all have friends who have taken Facebook off their phone, who are using Instagram instead, who've sworn off social media. How do you explain that?
We take that really seriously. For me, personally, you know, if someone would wake up this morning or yesterday morning and say, I don't want to use Facebook anymore because I don't trust them, that's something I take as seriously as possible.
And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Bloomberg Technology is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology and be sure to follow our global breaking news network, TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg.